The twin suns hung low over the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the vast fields of wheat. The golden sea swayed gently under the wind's careful touch, rustling like an ancient hymn. Deep in the heart of this land, a lone figure moved between the rows, his silhouette blending into the dusk. Elias Crow had been a farmer for as long as he could remember. His father had tilled this land before him, and his father before that. The Crow farm had been a quiet, steady presence on this planet for over 200 years. A simple life, some might call it, but for Elias, it was everything. While the rest of humanity pushed toward the stars, carving out empires in the void, he had chosen to stay grounded. He wiped the sweat from his brow, standing up straight and gazing toward the distant hills. Beyond them lay nothing but endless prairie, and past that, the unknown. He had heard the stories about the galactic wars, the alliances between races, the battles fought in the cold darkness of space. But out here, far from the core worlds, such conflicts seemed like myths. His concerns were simpler: the changing seasons, the health of his crops, and keeping the farm running with outdated machinery. The mechanical hum of his old agribot echoed across the fields, the relic of a bygone era still managing to function despite its years of wear. Elias had fixed it so many times he doubted any original parts remained. He sighed, shaking his head. Things were getting harder. The soil needed new treatments, the bots required expensive repairs, and supply shipments had become infrequent with the recent instability in the trade routes. He was about to turn back toward his farmhouse when a sound stopped him. A distant, rhythmic thrumming, like a pulse of energy, faint but growing louder. He narrowed his eyes and scanned the horizon. At first, he saw nothing. Then, a streak of light cut through the evening sky, a burning shape plummeting toward the earth. Elias felt his gut tighten. Ships rarely came this far without purpose. Was it a supply vessel, off course, or something worse? His instincts told him this was no accident. The impact shook the ground. A plume of dust and fire rose over the western ridge, and the dull thud of something heavy crashing echoed through the quiet fields. Elias stood frozen for a moment, then, without thinking, grabbed his rifle from the back of his old hover truck and climbed inside. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. With a lurch, he sped toward the crash site, the long grass whipping against the vehicle's sides. As he crested the ridge, he spotted the wreckage, a ship, sleek and dark, embedded in a smoking crater. The hull was scorched, riddled with plasma burns. This was no civilian transport. It was a warship. Elias jumped out, rifle in hand, eyes scanning for movement. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burnt metal. Then he heard it, a low, pained growl. He turned toward the sound and found himself staring at something out of legend. Half buried in the dirt, wounded but unmistakably alive, lay a dragon soldier. The being was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with obsidian scales marred by wounds. One of its wings was crumpled, half torn from its back. Its golden eyes flickered weakly as it attempted to push itself up, but failed, collapsing with a pained snarl. Elias knew what this was. The Drakthar, the warrior race that had once stood against humanity in the early days of the expansion. He had never seen one in person, but the stories painted them as unstoppable, ruthless creatures bred for war. Yet here was one, broken and struggling, its breath ragged. He should have walked away. The smart thing to do would be to leave it there, let it die. But something held him back. The dragon lifted its head slightly, its eyes locking onto him. "Human!" It rasped, its voice thick with pain. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. The creature was vulnerable. One shot, and it would be over. But as he stared at it, he didn't see a monster. He saw something desperate, something on the edge of death. With a deep breath, he lowered the weapon. "This is a mistake," he muttered to himself. He approached cautiously, slinging the rifle over his back. The dragon's soldier watched him, its expression unreadable. Elias knelt beside it, assessing the wounds. Plasma burns, deep gashes. This thing had been through hell. "You're lucky you crashed here," Elias said gruffly. "Anywhere else, and you'd be dead already." The dragon exhaled sharply, a rough sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "Maybe," I still am. Elias frowned. He was a medic, but he had treated wounded animals before. The injuries were severe, but not immediately fatal. If he worked fast, the dragon might survive. Stay still, Elias muttered, reaching for his kit. I'm no doctor, but I'll do what I can. The dragon's golden eyes flickered again, watching him. Why help? Elias didn't have an answer. Maybe it was the way the thing looked at him, like it didn't expect mercy. Maybe it was just stubbornness. Because I can, he finally said. The dragon said nothing more, its head resting against the dirt. Elias worked quickly, knowing that the night was coming, and with it, more than just the cold. Whatever had shot this thing down might come looking for it. And if that happened, Elias wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next. The next morning, Ethan stepped outside his farmhouse with a mug of coffee, staring out at the horizon. The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The fields stretched far and wide, a mix of green and golden hues swaying in the breeze. It was a quiet, predictable life, one he'd come to appreciate after years of hardship. But today, something felt different. His gaze drifted toward the barn, where the injured dragon soldier still lay resting. The previous night had been a blur of bandages, whispered reassurances, and cautious glances. Now, in the cold morning air, reality settled in. He had an alien soldier in his barn, and if anyone found out, things could get complicated fast. Ethan exhaled, downed the last of his coffee, and strode toward the barn. As he pushed open the heavy wooden doors, his eyes adjusted to the dim interior. The dragon was awake. His golden eyes snapped toward Ethan, filled with wariness and something else. Gratitude, perhaps. He had shifted slightly from where Ethan had left him. His powerful limbs sprawled awkwardly over the blankets. The wound on his side had scabbed over, but still looked painful. You're lucky I found you, Ethan muttered, stepping inside and crouching near the makeshift cot. Another night out there, and you be dead. The dragon didn't respond at first. Then, with slow deliberation, he rasped, You helped me. Ethan nodded. Yeah, that's what decent folks do. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Ethan wasn't sure what else to say. He wasn't in the habit of sheltering fugitives, especially not alien ones. But there was something about the dragon, something that made Ethan believe he wasn't a threat. Finally, the dragon exhaled, his breath coming out in a low rumble. My name is Zather. Ethan, he replied. So, Zather, mind telling me what the hell you were doing half dead in my field? Zather hesitated, as if debating how much to reveal. Then, in a low voice, he said, I was betrayed. Ethan raised an eyebrow. My squad was ambushed. A trap set by my own kin. They left me to die. His claws curled into the fabric of the blanket, anger flashing in his eyes. I do not know why, but I intend to find out. Ethan leaned back, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. Sounds like you got some enemies. Zather let out a dry chuckle. More than I can count. Ethan sighed. He wasn't sure how to feel about this. A road dragon soldier, left for dead by his own kind? That could mean trouble, serious trouble. But something in Zather's tone told Ethan that whatever had happened, it wasn't just some battlefield mistake. There was more to this. Before he could respond, the barn door creaked. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. He spun around, hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his hip. A shadow moved in the doorway. Then a familiar voice called out, Ethan, you in there? Damn it. It was Gregor, his neighbor. A good man, but one who liked to talk. If Gregor saw what was inside this barn, the whole town would know by sundown. Ethan shot a warning glance at Zather before stepping toward the entrance, forcing a casual smile. Morning, Gregor. Something I can do for you. Gregor squinted past him, trying to peer inside. Heard a commotion last night. Figured I'd check in. His gaze flicked to Ethan's bandaged forearm. You all right? Yeah, Ethan said quickly. Just a little accident. Nothing serious. Gregor didn't look convinced. He shifted, glancing past Ethan again. You sure? 'Cause I swear I saw some lights out this way. Figure maybe you had company. Ethan's grip tightened on the doorframe. Just me. A pause. Then Gregor shrugged. All right, just looking out for you. I appreciate it, Ethan said, forcing a grin. But I've got things under control. Gregor gave him one last look before tipping his hat. All right then. Take care. Ethan waited until Gregor disappeared down the dirt road before exhaling. He turned back to Zather. That was close. Zather nodded. Too close. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He couldn't keep this up forever. If people started asking questions, it was only a matter of time before someone came looking for Zather. And something told him they wouldn't be friendly. He needed a plan, and fast. But before he could think further, the ground trembled. A deep, distant rumble filled the air, sending vibrations through the wooden beams of the barn. Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew that sound. Engines. Big ones. He rushed outside, just in time to see the sky darken. Ships. Descending toward his farm. Ethan stood frozen, eyes locked on the descending ships. His gut twisted. These weren't human vessels. The sleek, angular hulls, the way they moved through the sky like silent predators. This was advanced alien tech. Zather limped to the barn entrance, his golden eyes widening. No, he breathed. Ethan turned to him. Friends of yours. Zather's jaw clenched. No, they are here for me. A chill ran through Ethan's spine. Then we've got a problem. The ships, 3 of them, touched down in the open field just beyond his crops. Dust and wind lashed the earth as their landing thrusters kicked up dirt. A tense silence followed. Then, with a mechanical hiss, the lead ship's ramp extended. Figures emerged. They were dragons, tall, armored, and moving with military precision. Unlike Zather's ragged state, these soldiers were pristine, their obsidian black armor gleaming under the sun. Their movements were deliberate, controlled. Professionals. Ethan counted 6 of them, all armed. Zather's claws flexed. They will not leave without me. Ethan exhaled. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a fighter. He was just a damn farmer. But these bastards had landed on his land, and if there was one thing he didn't tolerate, it was people showing up uninvited. He tightened his grip on the revolver at his hip. Not that it would do much against armored aliens, but it made him feel a little less helpless. The lead dragon soldier stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his armor lined with deep crimson etchings that marked him as someone important. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked on his Zather. Zather, the leader called, his voice carrying effortlessly across the distance. You are ordered to surrender. Zather's throat rumbled in a low, dangerous growl. And if I refuse? The leader tilted his head. Then we will take you by force. Ethan muttered under his breath. Yeah, I figured. He had about 10 seconds to decide whether to let Zather go or stand his ground. And Ethan had never been good at backing down. He took a step forward. Hate to break it to you, but you're trespassing on private property. The lead dragon turned his gaze to Ethan as if noticing him for the first time. This does not concern you, human. Ethan forced a smirk. See, that's where you're wrong. Zather's under my roof, which makes it my business. So unless you got a damn warrant, I'd suggest getting back on your ship and flying the hell away. The soldier stiffened. The leader's eyes darkened. Brave, he mused, but foolish. He raised a clawed hand. The soldiers moved in. Zather roared. Despite his injuries, he lunged forward with terrifying speed. The first soldier barely had time to react before Zather's claws slashed across his chest, sending him sprawling. Then everything exploded into chaos. Ethan dove behind a stack of hay bales as energy blasts ripped through the air. Zather fought like a wounded animal, all raw power and desperation, but he was outnumbered. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't win a direct fight, but he knew this land better than anyone. A plan formed. Crawling low, he reached the back of the barn and grabbed the lever controlling the irrigation system. It wasn't much, but it was something. With a sharp pull, he released the water. A high-pressure blast erupted from the pipes, catching 2 dragon soldiers off guard. They staggered, blinded as water drenched their armor. Zather seized the opportunity. He tackled another soldier, claws raking against metal. But the leader wasn't distracted. He turned toward Ethan. Ethan barely had time to move before the dragon slammed into him, knocking the wind from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, gasping. The leader loomed over him, claws raised. You should have stayed out of this. Ethan gritted his teeth. Not my style. Then a low, mechanical hum filled the air. The leader hesitated. His soldiers paused. A new presence had arrived. Ethan turned his head, eyes widening. Another ship. But this one was different. Bigger, older. Its hull was battered, scarred from countless battles, and it bore an emblem. Zather saw it too. His breath caught. That's... The ship's ramp lowered. Figures stepped out, tall, draconic, but different from the ones who had attacked. Their armor was worn but strong. Their gaze is sharp. Rebels. The leader of the black-armored soldiers cursed under his breath. Impossible. Zather's expression hardened. You should have killed me when you had a chance. The rebels charged. Ethan barely had time to roll aside as the battlefield erupted again. But this time, Zather had reinforcements. And for the first time since the night he found Zather bleeding in his field, Ethan felt something strange. Hope. Ethan scrambled back, breath ragged, as the two opposing dragon factions clashed. The air filled with the sounds of roars, metal striking metal, and the searing hiss of energy weapons discharging. The black-armored soldiers fought with brutal efficiency, their strikes calculated, precise. But the rebels fought like they had nothing left to lose, raw, unyielding, a force driven by sheer will. Zather was in the center of it all. His wounds should have slowed him, but instead, they seemed to fuel him. He fought like a creature possessed, his claws a blur as he tore through enemy ranks. Every movement was a declaration. I will not be taken. Ethan ducked behind an overturned tractor as a blast scorched past him, singing the air where his head had been. His farm had turned into a war zone. He peeked over the edge. The rebel leader, a dragoness with silver scars running down her crimson scales, moved like a storm through the battlefield, twin energy blades humming in her hands. She met the black-armored commander in a flurry of strikes, their blades locking in a deadly dance. You're outnumbered, she snarled. Surrender. The commander twisted his weapon, forcing her back. You mistake numbers for victory. With a flick of his wrist, he sent an energy pulse rippling through the ground. The shock wave blasted outward, throwing rebels off their feet. Zather barely managed to brace himself before it hit. He staggered but did not fall. His golden eyes locked onto the commander. Ethan saw it, the moment of decision. Zather would not let this battle drag on. He had to end it now. With a powerful leap, Zather launched himself at the commander, claws extended. The commander turned just in time to block, their bodies colliding in a thunderous impact. They hit the ground hard, rolling through dirt and debris. Zather's breath came in heavy, ragged bursts. The commander, despite his strength, was struggling. Ethan's mind raced. He had no weapon that could match their technology. But he had something else. He ran to the side of the barn, yanking open a rusted toolbox. His fingers closed around an old plasma cutter, used for welding, not combat, but it would do. Gritting his teeth, he charged. The commander had just thrown Zather off when Ethan struck. He jammed the plasma cutter against the exposed wiring on the commander's gauntlet and pulled the trigger. Sparks erupted. The commander let out a roar as his suit malfunctioned, servos locking up. Zather wasted no time. He drove his fist into the commander's chest, sending him sprawling. The remaining black-armored soldiers hesitated. Their leader was down. The tide had turned. The silver-scarred rebel dragoness stepped forward, blade at the ready. Yield. The commander snarled but did not rise. His soldiers, seeing no other choice, threw down their weapons. It was over. Ethan exhaled, his arms trembling. He turned to Zather. You good? Zather, bloodied but standing, managed a smirk. Thanks to you. The rebel dragoness approached. She studied Ethan for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. You are either very brave, she said, or very foolish. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. Probably both. She glanced at Zather. We need to leave. There will be more. Zather hesitated. He looked at Ethan. Ethan knew that look. It was a silent question. Would he come with them? Ethan looked around. His farm, his home, now scorched and battle-worn. And he knew his answer. But before he could speak, the sky rumbled again. More ships. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. Ethan barely had time to catch his breath before the sky split open again. More ships. Larger this time. Their angular black hulls reflected no light, like shadows given form. These weren't just reinforcements. They were warships. The rebel dragoness cursed under her breath. They've brought the fleet. Zather clenched his fists. They won't stop until we're all dead. Ethan scanned the battlefield. The rebels were battered and exhausted, their forces thinned. The black-armored commander lay in the dirt, bound, his glare searing with hatred. The captured soldiers sat in a guarded circle. But it wouldn't matter. The incoming fleet could level this entire farm in minutes. The fight wasn't over. It was about to get worse. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing his mind to work. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a farmer. He knew this land better than anyone. He knew its strengths, and he wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. He turned to Zather. "How good is your fleet at targeting underground structures?" Zather blinked, confused. "Their sensors are advanced, but that's all I needed to know." Ethan grabbed the plasma cutter from his belt and sprinted toward the nearest grain silo. The rebel dragoness called after him. "What are you doing?" Ethan didn't answer. He reached the silo, dropping to his knees. The underground irrigation system ran beneath the entire farm, a network of pipes, reservoirs, and tunnels. Old, built generations ago, but still solid. And if he could access it, he fired up the plasma cutter and sliced through the hatch at the silo's base. Sparks flew, the metal giving way. Zather and the rebel dragoness caught up just as he pried it open. Ethan pointed down. "Get your people underground." The dragoness's eyes widened. "This is a tunnel system. Flood channels, storage tanks, maintenance access." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. "It's not much, but it's cover." Zather's gaze darted between the hatch and the descending ships. He hesitated only for a moment. Then he turned to the rebel soldiers. "Get everyone inside. Now." The rebels moved fast, ushering their wounded through the entrance. Ethan ran to the others, grabbing whatever supplies he could. Above, the sky darkened. A deep, resonant hum filled the air as the warships locked onto the battlefield. Then, the first shot fell. The impact rocked the ground, sending dirt and debris skyward. Ethan dove into the tunnel, Zather right behind him. They landed hard, the air thick with dust. Above them, the farm burned. Ethan rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. His home, gone. His chest tightened, but there was no time to mourn. He pushed himself up, coughing. Zather placed a clawed hand on his shoulder. "You saved them." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Doesn't feel like a win." The rebel dragoness approached. "It isn't over." She tapped a device on her wrist, activating a holographic display. A map flickered to life, showing the surface, burning fields, advancing troops. But then, another signal appeared. Ships. Dozens of them. Inbound. Ethan frowned. More reinforcements. Zather's expression shifted, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "No," he said. "Not reinforcements. Retribution." Ethan's breath caught. The rebels had called in their own fleet. The war was about to change. The ground trembled as the rebel fleet descended from the sky. Sleek, silver warships broke through the atmosphere, their engines screaming defiance. They came in formation, tight, disciplined. These weren't scavengers or guerrillas. This was an organized military response. The Empire's warships turned their cannons upward. They were too slow. The first salvo struck with pinpoint accuracy. Explosions rocked the battlefield, tearing through Imperial positions. The Empire's fleet, so confident mere minutes ago, now scrambled, their forces caught between a burning farm and an avenging armada. Ethan, Zather, and the rebels watched from the tunnels. The war had arrived. Hours passed, maybe longer. Time blurred. When Ethan finally climbed out of the tunnels, his farm was gone. The fields, once golden, were scorched. His home, a pile of rubble. The silo where he and his father had stored grain for years had collapsed, metal twisted and broken. The scent of fire and plasma filled the air. Zather stood beside him, silent. The battle was over. The Empire had retreated, their fleet shattered. And yet, the victory fell hollow. The rebel dragoness approached, her armor dented, her scales flecked with soot. "The Empire won't forget this," she said. "But they won't recover from it either. Their grip on this sector is broken." Ethan barely heard her. His fingers curled into fists. His home, his land, everything his family had built gone. But he was still standing. And so were the people he had saved. Zather placed a hand on his shoulder. "I am in your debt, Ethan Walker." Ethan exhaled slowly. "What now?" Zather looked at the sky. "Now we rebuild. Not just this farm. Not just this planet." His golden eyes gleamed. "But everything. The rebel dragoness smirked. Your people have a saying, don't they? Don't poke the bear. She gestured at the destruction around them. Well, the Empire just did. Ethan chuckled, the sound bitter but real. In the weeks that followed, word of the battle spread. The farm, once nothing more than a patch of quiet land on a forgotten planet, became something more. A symbol. Rebel ships landed daily, bringing supplies, engineers, even farmers. They didn't just rebuild Ethan's home. They built something bigger, stronger. A refuge for those who had suffered under the Empire. A place where humans, dragons, and others stood together. They called it Walker's Stand. And when the Empire returned, as everyone knew they eventually would, they wouldn't find a lone farmer standing against them. They'd find a fortress, a movement, a legend. And above it all, etched into stone at the heart of the settlement, was a single phrase. A farmer gave a soldier shelter, and the galaxy changed forever.